I can take some questions.
I'm sure we have a lot of questions. On the right, can you let us know your name and organization?
Come back from Israel and had spent time with the reserves and expressed great concern about the readiness of Israel's reserve force, their ability, their lack of training, which is something that took me totally by surprise because of my trips to Israel. I always enjoyed seeing the young soldiers going around with their weapons on their back. I felt much safer knowing that they were there. That's a great concern of mine, along with something I read recently, and I don't know if you wrote it or where I might have read it, where the conscription of the young citizens has fallen off dramatically to something like 57 or 58%. The ultra-Orthodox, of course, continue not to be required to serve, but I understand they're trying to figure out a way to do that. I get a sense of desperation, and it bothers me a lot. Would you address those concerns?
Yeah, so the first thing about the reserves is that Israel is, we're a much smaller country. We have 7 million people in Israel, and 1.2 million of them are Arabs, so they don't serve in the military. And so we're facing, just Egypt alone has 80 million people. They have 1 million men under arms coming of age every year. So, the numbers are staggering when you look at it that way. And what that really means is that Israel's, as we saw in the Yom Kippur War, for instance, Israel's ability to deter attackers or to push them back after invasion relies completely on a reserve army, which involves most men between the ages of 21 when they leave their compulsory 3-year military service to 45. And actually, what you were saying, your assessment, or the general who you were quoting's assessment of the status of our reserve forces, I think was borne out in the Second Lebanon War, that they had not been prepared for battle, they had not been prepared for the type of battle, nor equipped for the type of battle that they were presented with in Lebanon. However, to the best of my knowledge, there has been a massive change in reserve training in the past 5 years. Training has become much more intensive, much more hands-on. Men are required to do far more military training every year than they had been previous to the Second Lebanon War. So, and my colleagues and friends who serve in reserves certainly are of the opinion that their training has been ramped up in a massive fashion since the Second Lebanon War, and I think that we saw the results in Operation Cast Lead in Gaza in 2008 and 2009, that again, the political leadership in both of those campaigns was the same failed leadership of Ehud Olmert, and that was reflected in the ultimate ends of those wars. But I think that the fighting on the ground was vastly superior in Gaza in 2008 and 2009 over what it had been in 2006. So that actually, I'm not as concerned about it as your colleague was. Regarding the draft age or the draft numbers, there has been a drop in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has seen a drop in conscription rates, basically due to the politics of the city, which have become much more post-Zionist, much more left-wing than the rest of the country. But that is being made up in increased induction of religious citizens, of religious boys into the army, and I think that that's a specific problem that's already being addressed mainly through social pressure and shame tactics of the high school principals in Tel Aviv. And I don't think that there should be a problem. We're also seeing higher conscription rates of yeshiva students now because of various laws that have been enacted, and also because of economic pushes into the job market, which requires military training service. Anybody else? Yeah, Aaron.
In the back there. Yeah.
Hi, Carolyn. Good to see you.
Good to see you always.
I was wondering.
We went to grad school together.
I was wondering if you could speak to what's going on in Syria. Press reports today that the Iranians are trying very hard to assist the regime in defeating the protests.
Well, that's a
there.
surprise.
Yeah, given Assad regime is basically a puppet.
So just real quick, because I actually have to meet somebody I have to leave in 10 minutes, so I'll just be very brief about Syria. I think Syria is a good news story. It's sort of like, in a way, it's like the Iran-Iraq war. We used to call it the Blessed War. May it continue for 100 years. And the reason why Syria is, in a certain regard, a repeat of that is because, I mean, first of all, there are forces on the ground, specifically the Kurds of Syria, who should be receiving as much support from the world community as they can possibly get, because their vision of Syria is something that I think is very very good for Western interests. They want a decentralized federal government in Syria, and we know that the more centralized a government is, the more tyrannical it becomes, and the more anti-Israel it is, and the more anti-American it is, because they need an external enemy in order to justify their rule. So the more decentralized the power structures are in Syria, the better it is for the West, and certainly the better it is for Israel, looking at it from the South. And so that's one thing. The other thing, though, is that, you know, Assad is unlike Mubarak in the following sense. I said that Mubarak shared very important basic strategic concerns with Israel and the United States regarding al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Iran. And as a consequence, these perceived shared interests informed his behavior and ensured to a degree that he was going to be a reliable ally, and he was going to keep the peace with Israel. That is not the case with Assad. Assad is essentially turned Syria into an Iranian colony. It is the logistical base of Hezbollah. It is the headquarters of Hamas, Islamic Jihad. It is the main way station for al-Qaeda fighters going into Iraq. And so it is very difficult for me to assess how the situation in Syria would be worse if he were overthrown by, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood. Because essentially we're looking at a policy that would be effectively identical to one that would be enacted by a Muslim Brotherhood government. The difference between the Assad regime and a successor Muslim Brotherhood regime are twofold. One is that the Assad regime has been in power for nearly 50 years, and so it is therefore extremely strong and powerful. A Muslim Brotherhood regime would take at least some time to consolidate its power, and if it came to power at the same time as, God willing, you'd get a new regime in Iran, it would be vastly weaker than the current Syrian regime. And also, of course, that would lead to the overthrow of the Hezbollah regime in Lebanon. So, you know, it would all be part of a very positive developments from our perspective. And the other thing is just that a Muslim Brotherhood regime would not necessarily be as strongly allied with Hezbollah, and they would be at war amongst themselves because they would be one of many factions that are fighting the Syrians today. So I think, you know, that of course it would be horrible. You know, nobody's advocating that the Muslim Brotherhood should be allowed to take over Syria. My point is that the devil that we know is not at all better than the devil that we may get to know, and therefore the more that we can make life difficult for Bashar Assad, the better it is for us.
Okay, Carolyn, I know you've got a meeting you need to go to. Thank you very much. This is terrific. Thank you so much.
Thanks.